The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. Joining me this episode after a couple weeks off is co-host Will Miles from his site readandreaction.com. You can find him on Twitter at WillMilesSCC. Will, I hope you enjoyed the time off from a couple weeks here off of Gators Breakdown and the 4th of July, and definitely glad to have you back.
Thanks, man. I told you off air that my standard response has been it was a good 4th of July because I remembered all 4 days. So it's better than last year.
All righty. Also joining us is Stefan Floyd, but you probably know him best on Twitter as Red Top Dread Top. He saw what Will and I and what this episode was about when I posted it yesterday, and we'll take a look at where the Gators need to improve from last season. And Stefan sent Will and I some stuff behind the scenes on one of the topics, and that I'm going to hit on pretty hard. So I decided to bring on him and his great work to help us break it all down right here on Gators Breakdown. Stefan, welcome to the show. Just a quick background, where you're from, and how did you become a fan of the Gators?
Well, I'm originally from Fort Myers, Florida. I live in Birmingham, Alabama now, but location doesn't change who I'm a fan of, as Will can attest to. Doesn't matter where we are, Gator Nation, man, bleed orange and blue. Still, man, just a Gator, man. That's just me, ready for SEC Media Days. That'll be up here in next week, 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man, just ready. All orange and blue, man, ready for this.
Yeah, I know you and I talk behind the scenes as well. I will be busy as I can be next week at SEC Media Days, but we're definitely going to try and meet up and get a drink or get some food or something. But 1 week from today, I'll be hitting Gators Breakdown. Will be at SEC Media Days, and we'll have some good stuff there. But hopefully, we'll meet up with you.
Yeah, man, let's do that.
All right, then here we go. Remember, you can find Gators Breakdown on newsforjacks.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes, as well as articles from the News for Jack sports team. Catch Gators Breakdown on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, YouTube, and Spotify. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. And a special announcement, I put it out on Twitter over the weekend. August 17th, kickoff party here in Jacksonville at the Red Gill Bistro. Gators Breakdown listener James Carlin giving us a hookup on a great location here in Jacksonville. August 17th, the week before Florida and Miami kick off the season, free admission. We'll have to pay for food and drinks. I put out an RSVP on Twitter, but if you don't have Twitter, reach out to me somehow. Comments on YouTube. GatorsBreakdown@gmail.com. That's an email as well. You can send there if you are interested in coming to the August 17th kickoff party here in Jacksonville. All right, so let's get while we're here on Gators Breakdown. Gators have some areas to improve on to have an even more successful 2019 season coming off a 10-win 2018 campaign. I'm going to start with the Gators having to get off to better starts. You guys know that's been a big topic for me dating back to last season. Overall, only 67 points in the first quarter of games last season. 44 of those points were versus Charleston Southern, Colorado State, and Idaho. Now, that was counting offense and defense. There were 28 points scored versus Idaho in the first quarter. 21 of those 28 points come from the offense. The Gators scored 14 points versus Tennessee in the first quarter, aided by some great field position, of course. The reason I bring that game up is the Gators did not score a single touchdown in the first quarter versus the FBS opponent after the Tennessee game. Run it down here. Versus Mississippi State, 0. LSU, 0. Vandy, 0. Georgia, 0. 4 straight games with no points in the first quarter for the Gators. 3 versus Missouri, none versus South Carolina, 3 versus FSU, and 3 versus Michigan. So after the Tennessee game, 8 games versus FBS opponents and 9 points in the first quarter. Add in, going even before that, 0 points versus Kentucky in the first quarter as well. For the season, that averaged out to be about 5 points in the first quarter for the Gators in the season. But it did get better. As I mentioned, Florida's first quarter scoring 67 points on the season. Second quarter scoring 170. So about a 13-point average in the second quarter on the season. Stefan, the reason I was bringing you on, you followed this up pretty good. You had no idea this was going to be one of the topics I was going to hit on for an area of improvement. And you found some pretty good stats in comparing Mullen and his days at Mississippi State and what Mississippi State and Florida did last year.
Yeah, man, I was watching some of the older games from this past season over the weekend, and just was noticing or just reminded myself that we had a lot of slow starts. Like even in games against Florida State and Michigan, where we were dropping 40 points on people, we still weren't scoring to start the game off. So it just made me want to go look and see, I guess, the actual numbers behind that. And I know one of the actual good things about Mac was that we really were happy that he would start off the games with a good first drive, and then we just wouldn't do anything on offense anymore. So I just wanted to see first quarter scoring just over this past season compared to Mac seasons and how Mullen did when he was at Mississippi State. And what I looked at, we averaged 2.6 points per game in the first quarter this past season. And Mac in his first year averaged 6.5, 5.1 in his second year. And of course, we had that year with the Credit Card 9 where he also averaged 2.6. And I went to look at, was that just a blip on the radar? Was that just due to Dan Mullen in his first year in the system being in Gainesville as the head coach? So I wanted to go look and see what he did at Mississippi State. And I did the same 3 years that Mac was in Gainesville. And Mullen averaged 7.2 in the first quarter, 5.6 and 5.9 in those 3 years respectively. So I'm hoping that was just a blip on the radar, that 2.6. I'm hoping it was just a new system thing, and that this coming up year we'll be able to get back to that 6-7 points in the first quarter of a game. We get a touchdown and stop just going 8 games in a row with no points.
Yeah, Will, you look at the 3 losses last year. I did mention Kentucky. There was no points there. Of course, Georgia, no points there. There was 3 versus Missouri, but we all remember going back to the Georgia game, the flea flicker. Van Jefferson's wide open down the field. Felipe Franks hits that. Maybe it's a different game. Maybe a touchdown there, puts more pressure on Georgia, and it's a closer game in the fourth quarter. I don't know how necessarily it translates. And like Stephon says, hopefully it gets better. Mullen's history says it will. Maybe some more familiarity. Felipe Franks in the offense, all the returning starters that come back besides the offensive line. Maybe there's an improvement here.
Yeah, I think part of it also is you got to look at where did Florida actually improve last year. So Florida got a lot better when they were running the ball. So I think they were like 13th in the FBS and yards per attempt when they were running the ball, when they were sort of in the mid 50s in 2017. And so when you're running the ball that well, really what you're trying to do is you're trying to wear down the defense. So it shouldn't really be a shock to us that in the third and the fourth quarter against teams where Florida should have, quite honestly, been the physically superior team, against teams like Vanderbilt, against teams like South Carolina, especially as worn down as South Carolina was on the backside of that defense, that they were able to stage these comebacks. But obviously it's concerning when you're down by 3 touchdowns to Vandy, or when you're down, 35-14 or something to South Carolina. Like, you can't rely on those sorts of comebacks, especially once you're the hunted. I mean, last year, there were a couple of people who were probably, Kentucky was probably circling Florida on the schedule, but, not everybody was circling the Gators. And I think coming into 2019, people are going to be circling the Gators, and you're going to have to hit those throws. And I mean, the reality is that Frank's downfield and particularly, especially in the losses, was not real accurate down the field. He's going to have to be more accurate this year. And the offense last year really did rely on explosive plays. There were a bunch of long runs by Pirine and Pierce. The one that comes to mind is the one that Pirine popped against Florida State that really started the engines on offense there. But the other thing is that Mullen, I think in some respects, especially early on in the year, had to protect Franks. And so he was trying to figure out what the defense was doing early on in the game. And in order to do that, you call conservative, you have a game plan that's conservative. I think towards the end of the year, the thing that would be a little bit concerning is that against Michigan, against Florida State, the starts were still kind of slow. And that's where, we noted changes in Frank's completion percentage and the way he was playing and the confidence and running the ball, but it didn't necessarily translate into more points early in the game. So certainly that's something we'll want to look for early against Miami. But again, I think when you're sort of protecting your offensive line or protecting your quarterback, you're going to come out maybe a little bit more conservatively against opponents who are skilled. And so, you look at Charleston Southern or you look at Colorado State, you say, But against Kentucky, they were chucking the ball all over the place. So, but again, some of that was because they fell behind early. So, I think it's an area to focus. I think it's an area to pay attention to. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the key area that I'm going to be looking for in terms of improvement this year.
Yeah, I think if they do improve there, what I think it means is that it may be a better overall offense. Because I don't necessarily think if they don't get it done, like we brought up the FSU and the Michigan games, it doesn't mean they won't put 40 points on the board. But if you do get off to a faster start, maybe you don't put as much pressure on your defense. Say the Missouri game, go back, they don't really score a whole lot of points early on. You fall behind early. You're kind of panicking, and I'll go into that too. Mullen even kind of admitted that in the Kentucky game last year. They fell behind and kind of maybe panicked and put the game in Felipe Frank's hands a little bit more. Yeah, it's one area I definitely want to see improvement just because I think it's kind of a chain reaction to make the whole game easier the rest of the way.
Right. If we can get 14, 17 in the first half, as opposed to having to come out and where we have to score 30 in the second half, I think that'll make things a lot easier. Game plan wise, just strategy, just everything. As far as milking the clock in the second half, we can go into the second half with a lead as opposed to trying to play catch up. To Will's point, I don't think that, because when I was looking at it, I also wanted to look at some of the superpowers, if you will, of college football and see where they ranked in it. And it wasn't necessarily every year that Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State were at the top in first quarter scoring either. Obviously, this past year with Alabama scoring 50 in the first half, that was a little different. But typically, they weren't really up there super high either. So there's not necessarily a direct correlation between first quarter scoring and winning. But I do think if we can go ahead and just alleviate that problem, that'll help make just the whole game a little bit easier for us to focus on, us to get a win, get a W.
Well, and I think one of the things we need to look at is also when you look at the first half, Florida scored 13.5 points, at least against FBS opponents, and only gave up 11.1. So going into the half, Florida was still ahead. And in some circumstances, I mean, again, the Mississippi State game is the one that comes to mind.
Right.
Florida was down at the half, but they were managing that game in order to be able to take over in the second half. And, in the first half, you were sort of like, yee. And especially when they hit the guy when Mississippi State hit the guy streaking down the middle of the field and he dropped the ball, you're like, ooh, this could get out of hand. But from that point on, Florida really kind of physically dominated the game.
Yeah, and that was the point of FSU and Michigan as well. Like, even though they weren't necessarily putting the ball in the end zone early on, you felt that Florida was kind of, really in good shape in both of those games. And, Will, I think you and I were texting during the Peach Bowl, was like, man, this looks eerily similar to the FSU games because Florida was driving. They were getting in scoring position, but had to settle for field goals. So, yeah, first quarter scoring, maybe even first half scoring, Florida puts themselves in good shape, to get especially as I go back to that Georgia game a little bit. You never know what happens if you get up with that flea flicker. And talking about maybe, catering to the offense with Felipe Franks and a young offense trying to, maybe cater to Felipe Franks because maybe trying to figure out what the defense did and maybe being a little conservative. That was one play where we saw a bye week. And you get a flea flicker, and not necessarily trying to be conservative versus Georgia, maybe trying to get a quick one on them.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, obviously, you get up 7-0 early. That plays a big role. But I still think when you're playing a physically superior team, I mean, I remember I was at the Alabama game, that John Brantley hit DeBose for a touchdown to open up the game, and everybody in the stands went nuts, and we all thought that was going to be a rout, or at least it was going to be close. Yeah. And then Alabama came back with 42 unanswered points or something like that. The whole stadium was quiet by the end of the third quarter. So, obviously you want to hit that play early on, but I still think that, really, and I think this sort of goes to the way, like we've talked a lot about points per game, but I think what we want to pay attention to is yards per play. And we want to know, are they hitting explosive plays down the field? And maybe they're not converting that into as many points. Maybe they're settling for some field goals early on. But I don't necessarily think that the red zone conversions are critical. I think getting into the red zone a lot is critical. So, I'd be less concerned with the point total and more concerned with, are they moving the ball consistently? And I think, there were some games, especially early in the season against Vanderbilt, where, I remember messaging you going, this looks a lot like Mac's offense right now, early on in that Vanderbilt game. Now, obviously, they were able to sort of break out of those funks from time to time. But, you get into that funk early in the game. A couple of times in 2017, Franks would make a mistake and then would sort of go into a shell. Last year, he didn't make a whole lot of mistakes. And so, but some of that is was because they were very conservative early on. So it's something to look for. I mean, certainly if you're up 21-0 at the half, obviously it gives you an advantage. But I think some of that is game plan related, right? That last year they clearly thought their offensive line and their running backs were a strength. They clearly thought being able to throw those swing screens out to the wide receivers, against Mississippi State especially, was an area of strength. And then, quite honestly, when the defense got turnovers, the offense looked a whole lot better, right? So against Florida State, there were a lot of turnovers. Those turned into points late in the second half. I don't know that the offense obviously was able to move the ball and convert those into points, but still, when, Polite comes around the corner and strip sacks Francois, and you're already up by 2 touchdowns, it's easy to take a shot. Same thing against Tennessee, right? It was just a litany of turnovers in that first half that were converted into points, and really Florida was never challenged. So, it's a symbiotic thing. I think if the defense gets turnovers and really sets it deep in enemy territory, then you're able to take advantage. And for the most part, those key turnovers were occurring in the second half.
I think what we can definitely say here is there are multiple ways to win games. And I want one with a fast start, but I'll take a W any way possible. So, we brought up Felipe Franks a little bit. The slow starts can somewhat be contributed to Felipe Franks and the inconsistency in his game in year one under Mullen. It's hard to pin the losses on just Felipe Franks, and I'll get the points, and we'll get the points about the defense later on and where they can also improve. But as far as going to take the next step, Franks is going to need to be more consistent, make some plays versus Kentucky. I thought, as I said, Mullen admitted he probably relied on Franks too much in that game. Franks 17 of 38, 44.7% completion percentage, 232 yards, 6.1 yards per attempt there. At the same time, or at that time in the season, I thought 38 attempts were too much. In what we kind of just identified as Florida's offense as being built on the run game. In Florida, to me, Florida was never down enough in that game to abandon the run game like they did. It was just a weird game versus a good Kentucky team. Second loss of the season versus Georgia. We all remember the flea flicker opening that game. Franks ends up 13 to 21, 61.9% completion percentage, but only 105 yards, only 5 yards per attempt. Had that great throw to take the lead in the third quarter, but that was about it versus Georgia. Then a week later, in one of Felipe Franks' worst performance of his career leads to a benching, 9 of 22 versus Missouri, 40.9% completion percentage, only 84 yards, 3.8 yards per attempt. Of course, we all know turned it on after that. But you guys were talking behind the scenes, kind of late yesterday and today. Will, I know when we had our big episode on Felipe Franks about a month ago, you noticed some things in his game. And then Stephon kind of, you opened up Stephon's eyes to something to look forward to in film, and he found some more stats of where Franks was, maybe where one side of the field that he favors in what we teased, about a month ago.
Yeah, man. One of the things I think is in wins on yards or on attempts of 20 plus yards, Franks averaged 15.5 yards per attempt, and in losses it was 4.8. And his completion percentage was 47.8%. In losses, it was 15.4%. And so, clearly an area for improvement is going deep, being consistent, going deep. That throw against Georgia, I think, sort of epitomizes it. But there were a bunch of throws against Missouri that if he had hit, could have changed that game. There were some throws against Kentucky that if he had hit, could have changed that game. And really, in the last 3 games versus the FBS opponents, so South Carolina, Florida State, and Michigan, he averaged 18.9 yards per throw on those 20-plus yard attempts. So, there's some hope that he's becoming more consistent and became more consistent as the season went along. But certainly, the losses occurred because there was a deficiency in the quarterback play in those losses, and the wins occurred because he played very well in those wins. So I think sort of we need to, we've talked a lot this offseason about there being more consistency and less highs, less lows with the way Franks is playing. I think if we see that this year, then Florida's offense is going to improve.
Yeah, I know when I was looking at Felipe and his passing percentage, what caught my eye was just the deep ball, first of all. And the stats that I was talking with you guys about earlier today. He was completing, through week 10, was completing 32.5% of his passes on 20 yards plus. And then Will pointed out to me that he also is not very good on the left side of the field. And I looked at that, and he's completing 30.2% of his passes to the left side of the field. So kind of back to what Will was saying earlier, I think that Dan Mullen is doing a really good job of just managing Felipe Franks and playing to his strengths. So I think another thing that I looked at when I was looking at those percentages was he had 43 attempts to the left side of the field, 45 in the middle, 77 to the right. So it's almost as though Dan Mullen is, for the most part, trying to design plays to get him to where his strong suits are. There's no point in throwing it over there to the left if he's not going to complete them. If you're completing 30% of the passes over there, then 70% of the time when you call a play for that side of the field, it was a wasted play. So I still want him to work on that. I went back and watched the spring game just to see if there were any improvements at all, even though I know it was against a vanilla defense and just kind of a very vanilla game plan and an offensive friendly game plan. It looked better, but again, you can only take so much from the spring game. I really want to see what he does against Miami, and then we'll kind of go from there for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it also is, sometimes he's thrown to the left because of his read, right? So if they're playing something to take advantage of man coverage and he's running, and the guys on the left-hand side are running routes to take advantage of man coverage, that's where he's supposed to go based on the way the defense is playing. And so Mullen can protect that in some instances because they can have option routes and other things that they do based on what the defense is giving him. But at the end of the day, he's going to have to throw in that direction. He's going to have to throw accurate. Particularly when he throws deep, you get when he's thrown deep, there were a lot of passes that were overthrown going to the left-hand side, whereas when he goes to the right-hand side, he's able to drop it in. And that was true even 2 years ago. I mean, the opening play against Michigan, he dropped the ball right into Hammond, I think, on the deep play against Michigan. And we thought, here we go. We got a quarterback who can check it deep. And then the rest of the game was a disaster. But, the other area I think he can improve is if you go back and look at his performance in SEC play. So, again, you look at 20-plus yards, his completion percentage was 31%. 10 to 19 yards, his completion percentage was 34%, and he only averaged 9.7 yards per pass on 20-plus yard attempts. So, again, sort of the same trend that in SEC play. And granted, three of those losses were against SEC opponents. But, really when you're looking at a schedule and you're looking at Florida's schedule last year, I mean, you have Florida State and Michigan. Florida State had a down year. Michigan didn't really have all their guys on defense in that bowl game. So the meat of the schedule is the SEC, and that's where he was really struggling there. And so it's not just the deep throws, it's also the intermediate throws. If you look at 10 to 19 yards in losses, he had 24% was his completion percentage, and in wins, it was 47%. So not only are we talking about passes where he's going way down the field, but also sort of in that intermediate range where, to be quite honest, you're going to have to be able to throw the ball to defeat zones, right? I mean, when you get zone coverage, you're going to have to go down between 10 and 19 yards. And that was something that you could see they had worked on because they started throwing over the middle a lot more, sort of some of those in-breaking routes from the right-hand side. And Franks was able to do that successfully the last few games of the year.
All right, let's switch to the other side of the ball here and the defense, rush defense and pass defense here. And rush defense if we're looking at areas of improvement, you can definitely look at the three losses when you're looking at that. Kentucky had 41 attempts, 303 yards, 7.39 average. Georgia, 41 attempts, 189 yards, 4.61 average. Not too bad there. Missouri, 42 attempts, 221 yards, 5.26 yard average there. So those three games, 41 attempts, 237 yard average given up, 5.8 yards per carry in those three games. In wins, 37 attempts, only about 4 less than the 41 in the losses there, but only giving up about 140 yards a game on the ground in the wins for the Gators there. So about 100 yards less given up on the ground in wins, 3.8 yards per carry in wins, 2 yards less than the losses. So rush defense, for as good as it looked at times last year, you go and look at the three losses from the Gators, Will, and tell you what, that's where the Gators have got to improve. We know up front, Florida's got some issues to figure out. Defensive tackle, replacing Ja'Kai Polite, replacing Vashawn Joseph. But if Florida really wants to kind of turn the tides in the losses last year, you're looking at about 40 attempts at these. In three losses to Kentucky, Georgia, and Missouri, and giving up 237 yards on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there were some issues with Snell in particular that I'm remembering against Kentucky. But, one of the interesting things is last year, so if you look at yards per play, Florida improved from 105th against the pass to 40th, and they just improved from 54th against the rush to 52nd. So if you really look at a place where maybe they can make a leap forward by being in the second-year Grantham scheme, I don't necessarily think it's going to be against the pass. They made really good strides last year between where they were to where they are now versus the running game didn't really improve very much. Just sort of stayed the same as it had the year before. The year before it was kind of a mid-level thing, and the 6 years before that, Florida's defense had averaged, if you eliminate 2017, Florida had averaged a ranking of 17.3 in terms of yards per play. So really a top 20 defense against the run. Went to 54th in 2017 and then just 52nd last year. So if you believe that 2017 was sort of an aberration, well, 2018 sort of headed in the wrong direction still. I think against the run, really being stout up front is a place they're going to have to improve.
Yeah, as far as run defense, man, I mean, it's pretty much the stuff that you guys already know. Defensive tackle play has to step up, has to get better. According to Football Outsiders, we were 70th when it comes to run defense. I think another big part of that is just quarterback contain, man. Just our defensive ends getting past the quarterback and just creating lanes for these dual threat quarterbacks, or even just remotely mobile quarterbacks, just because our defensive tackles are getting no push up front. That's something we definitely got to work on. Terry Wilson, talking about that Kentucky game, he averaged 10 yards a carry against us. Burned us on I think it was a 2nd and 16, 3rd and 16, had a really big conversion. I don't know if he got a touchdown on that one, but he had a big conversion on that. And if we just have better QB contain and things like that, man, we can avoid a lot of those problems, a lot of those big plays. If that's a 2nd and 16, you force a 3rd and 16, you know what I mean? Or 3rd and 20. If it's 3rd and 16, you force a punt, get an extra possession in our hands. So things like that, we really gotta work on that. And to the also to that point, talking about explosive plays, we really gotta limit that. We weren't bad in the red zone as far as red zone defense, but last year especially, we gave up 5 touchdowns before the Tennessee game out of the red zone, like no red zone touchdowns. Everything was 20 yards plus. Again, that Kentucky game in particular, they never reached the red zone on that entire game, never got past the 20 and still beat us. You know what I mean? So that's just explosive plays. We got to stop that, got to slow that down. Run defense, especially. I know a lot of that had to do with Marco getting hurt. So they were able to kind of torch our secondary, but we really got to shore that up. Hopefully we can stay healthy and avoid some of those problems this year.
Yeah, because to me, 2 quarterbacks you're going to add to that is Joe Burrow started running more last year as LSU season went on. So you probably see him maybe run a little bit more too if that continues to be an issue for this Gator defense. And also Kelly Bryant at Missouri. He's got legs too. So 2 quarterbacks there. Yes, he faced Burrow last year, but as I said, his legs got used a little, much like Frank's, got used as the year went on a little bit more. And also Kelly Bryant there, not necessarily used to facing him, the transfer from Clemson.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about explosive plays going against Florida. I'd actually say this is something Florida needs to maintain, maybe not necessarily improve. But last year, Florida was 18th in takeaways in the entire country. The year before, they were 56th. Over the last 7 years, they've averaged a ranking of 50th in takeaways. So they were able to really sort of generate explosive plays in the defense last year. A lot of that was Ja'Kai Polite coming around the end and stripping the quarterback. I mean, that really sort of shifted the balance in both the Tennessee and the LSU games, having him come around the end and make a strip. And it turned in, it stopped LSU's drive when it looked like they were going to go up by 10 or 14 in that first quarter. And then, it really sort of put Florida on the board to start the game against Tennessee. So I don't know that that's necessarily an area of improvement. It's certainly something we expected to see with Grantham taking over year 1. But, some of those Muschamp teams, I mean, there were I'm looking at it. So in 2013, obviously Florida had a very good year in 2013. They were 92nd in turnovers in the country. They were 14th in 2012 when they played very, very well. They were 115th in 2011 when they were sort of But then they were 4th in 2014 and they were 7-5, 8-4, something like that. So, I look at it and say takeaways don't necessarily correlate to wins and losses, but certainly they correlate to your defense outperforming its sort of yards per play average. And that would be my concern with the defense from last year is it ranked 32nd 37th overall in yards per play, but ranked in the 20s, the low 20s in terms of points per game allowed. So they were sort of outperforming their underlying metrics in terms of the points they were giving up. And I think a lot of that is attributable to turnovers. And so to see improvement from that unit this year is going to require that they still have that same kind of explosiveness and can get those turnovers.
Yeah, and I don't know I would assume it can correlate here. I don't remember how many turnovers by the opponent there were in the 3 losses, Kentucky, Georgia, and Missouri. I don't remember a whole lot, but right off the top of my head, that we go back to LSU, go back to FSU, and we remember the turnovers in those games, but the 3 losses, I don't remember off the top of my head there being that many.
There were 2. Kentucky had 2. We both had 2 in that Kentucky game. Yeah. We had 3 in the Georgia game. They didn't have any.
Right.
And I don't remember the Missouri.
I can't imagine there was a turnover because I was there and nothing good happened.
Hey, the tailgate was good, Will. The
tailgate was excellent. But that was sort of the highlight of the trip on that with everybody.
Nothing good inside of the stadium. There we go. Let's switch to the Gators secondary right quick. And this comes from College Football News, a site that I use a lot here. And finished 13th in the nation in pass defense, but got picked clean. This is a quote from them. Picked clean during the rough 3-game stretch by Georgia's Jake Fromm, Missouri's Drew Lock, and South Carolina's Jake Bentley. Those 3 combined to hit over 70% of their passes for an average of 245 yards a game, 8 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. In that 3-game stretch there. Florida did beat South Carolina, lost to Missouri and Georgia. And the other loss last year was Kentucky. And Kentucky's Terry Wilson hits in Stephon, kind of going to your point, Terry Wilson, 69% of his throws, 2 scores. His stats didn't blow you away, but he was efficient in what he was doing. So I went and kind of was digging a little bit deeper here and going back to the 3 losses last season. They only gave up 213 yards average in those 3 losses. Kentucky only threw for 151 yards, but I said, but kind of just efficient what they were doing. But it was the average yards per attempt and completion percentage where the Gators' pass defense was hurt. 72.2% of passes were completed in the 3 losses, while throwing for an average, while the opponents averaged 8.9 yards per attempt. If that stat had been for the season, Florida would have ranked 122nd in the nation for the 8.9 yards per attempt. So that really opened my eyes in the 3 losses. That's how bad the pass defense was there. To be fair here, Marco Wilson goes down versus Kentucky. C.J. Henderson goes down versus Georgia. So at that time, you're without your top 2 cornerbacks versus one of the best teams in the country. There's 2 games to where if you're full staffed on defense, I doubt those numbers are that high, especially the yards per attempt are still that high. But still, it's worth keeping an eye on because safety play is involved there as well. Same cast of characters are returning there. Though hopefully, Brad Stewart's on the field more this fall at safety.
And I also think a lot of that had to do with just who it happened against. Georgia and South Carolina in particular were 2 of the more explosive teams in the SEC. I know the record didn't show that with South Carolina, but with Deebo Samuel, when he's healthy, they have a pretty explosive offense. As you may or may not remember, going into that Georgia game, that was supposed to be a big deal. It was, South Carolina against Georgia. It's going to be a great game. You know what I mean? That was because of South Carolina's explosive offense. So that was kind of status quo for them when they played against us. Not to make any excuses, we definitely have more talent. We should have handled them far easier than we did. But I do expect our safety play to be better. Just 2nd year in the system, more experienced guys. I just have to trust the coaching staff on that. I don't really have any numbers to back that one up. I'm just kind of hoping that our coaching staff will get us to the next level on that one.
I think Will's got us covered there for some numbers on that.
Well, one of the things that I've been looking at recently, I've been doing some film study and I haven't quite gotten to the point where I can publish it yet. But I was looking back at that Missouri game, and then I was looking back at the Mississippi State game in terms of the defense. And Grantham pretty much threw the kitchen sink at both of them. The difference was that when he did something post-snap, Fitzgerald had no clue what to do with the ball. So if he showed zone and then switched into a single high safety look after the snap, Fitzgerald threw it to the wrong guy or threw it away or got flushed or held on the ball too long. When he did that against Locke threw it to the right spot right away. He had clearly been coached, get the ball out, do not allow the defensive line to get to you. And then eventually they got
very Dooley nonetheless.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily Dooley. I think a lot of it is, you look at the guys that you highlighted when you were talking about the quarterbacks. You got Bentley, who was a 3-year starter. You got Locke, who's been starting since he was a freshman, and you got Fromm, who's been starting since he was a true freshman. Guys with 3 or 4 years in the system, and there aren't a lot of guys coming up on Florida's schedule this year who fit that description. I mean, Miami, maybe you got Martell, UT Martin. I don't think we have to worry about. Kentucky, you got Wilson. So again, the questions there still exist because of the way he played last year.
Stop the big plays. Just stop the big plays.
Yeah, I mean, Tennessee, you got Guarantano. Well, so and you wonder whether Grantham's going to play more zone that game.
Yeah.
Right? Do you just say, hey, we're going to keep him in front of us because we don't think they can drive all the way down the field? That's not really the way Grantham plays. And so it'll be interesting to see whether he makes some adjustments based on what they saw last year, especially if they're having trouble controlling the quarterback. But Tennessee, you got Guarantano, who's been there forever, but hasn't really been very good. Then you got Towson, you got Auburn, who's going to have a new quarterback. Then you got sort of the area where I think the secondary is going to get challenged, where you've got LSU on the road. So you've got Burrow in his second year in the system. Then you got South Carolina with Bentley, and then you got Georgia with Fromm. And that's sort of the 3 where I think you go, okay, like that's maybe where the secondary either proves that it's for real or, is going to struggle and struggle the same way they did last year in those 3 games. And then you finish it out with Vanderbilt, Missouri, and Florida State. I don't think there's really, Bryant has experience, but I don't necessarily think that he was explosive in any of his stops. So, and he ran the ball quite a bit, but he wasn't necessarily chucking the ball down the field like those 3 guys. So that's what I would key in on. I'd key in on LSU, South Carolina, and Georgia in terms of looking at the secondary. Look at the yards per play in those games. If they're giving up considerably more than we would, considerably more than they have throughout the year, then I think we can say, okay, there's some issues in the secondary we need to be aware of, especially if we get to a big time bowl game. But with Henderson out there and with Wilson coming back, if he's 100% healthy, certainly him going down, last year was a bad thing, but if he can come back and he can be 100% healthy, being able to have the experience that Trey Dean got last year, I think is a real benefit this year, because he might not have gotten that playing time last year if Wilson had stayed healthy the whole year.
Stefan, anything else on the defense? And then you have one more point on the offense you wanted to get in here.
Not really. I mean, one point that can probably go to both sides, man, is just penalties. If we could cut down on that, man, just rewatching those games, man, we had a ton of penalties, man. I didn't really remember it being that bad as the season was going on. I guess the wins kind of made me forget those. But we finished number 22 in the country in terms of penalty yardage. So if we could just cut down on that, which was kind of weird to me because that wasn't typically what Mullen had. I know that's one thing he was supposed to bring over from Mississippi State, was us cutting down on his penalty yardage.
I don't know what it is. It seems like at the University of Florida, we're just going to be a penalized school. I mean, it doesn't. Even the best teams under Meyer, we were the most penalized team in the country.
I say it all the time, man. I kind of mean it as a joke, but I kind of mean it seriously. That I think these refs just kind of have it in. Like they just kind of they're upset. Spurrier said something to somebody back in the 90s, and they just won't let it go. So they just flag us every chance they get, man. It's all right. We'll get over it. We still got 10 wins with them calling a lot of flags against us, so we'll be all right.
It's a great point about the penalties, because coming into last year, one of the things I sort of highlighted as looking forward to was not seeing the false start penalties that we saw throughout 2017, and that Mullen, in his 9 years at Mississippi State, had teams that really were very disciplined and typically ranked very well in terms of penalties. And then Florida came out last year and was 125th in penalties per play, so damn near dead last at FBS in penalties. So, but I would say I don't recall a whole lot of just stupid dead ball penalties. I mean, there were holding penalties. That's when you get physically beat, right? There's pass interference penalties. That's when, again, you get beat and you grab or whatever. I don't recall a ton. And there were a few false start penalties, but I don't recall we didn't have any 1st and 20s where we had 2 straight false starts in the red zone or anything like that. Though I bet you if I go back and watch the tape, and watch it closely, I'll probably see him and go, yeah, I don't know. With McElwain gone, I just sort of ignored it.
What was crazy was most of the false start penalties were on Juwan Taylor out of everybody.
Yep.
Like it would be on the second round, but first round talent, Juwan Taylor. I was just like, how are they calling these on 65 all the time? I thought he's supposed to be good. But As far as the pass interference, man, a lot of those went on Trey Dean, and I think a lot of that could have just been to just freshmen. You know what I mean? Out there being nervous, just kind of just being outplayed a little bit. Not that he's not talented or he won't be capable of anything like that, but just rookie stuff. You know what I mean? I expect him to be much better this year. I don't really see Trey Dean as a major concern, but a lot of those were just pass interference on Trey Dean, false starts on Jawan Taylor. I started to keep a tally on those over the weekend, but I figured I would have better things to do.
Man, what Gators Breakdown is known for, throwing out numbers and analysis. That's just what we did right there. We'll get into some news and updates here. Of course, commitments and transfers not stopping, but there we go. I mean, that's what we do here at Gators Breakdown. We broke it down with plenty of numbers, plenty of a deep dive there. And Will, kind of, you hit on your article a little bit, Read Reaction. You released it today, this Monday morning. Anything else you want to add from the article, and a little kind of teaser to kind of send people to get some more analysis of where the Gators can improve?
Yeah, I mean, really the biggest thing I looked at was, so Florida improved both on offense and defense last year. Offense was a 72 ranking improvement. Defense, I think, was like 30. And so the question I was trying to ask is, how often do teams, after they have that kind of ranking improvement, how often do they then improve the next year? And the answer is not very often. So it's about 35% on offense and 30% on defense over the last 10 years, where teams have had similar ranking increases and have seen the ranking increase or stay the same the next year. So, but at the same time, if Florida's offense and defense improve this year, that's going to put them in contention for the playoff. And, ESPN's FPI had the Gators percentage about 10% of making the playoff. And it turns out that's about the percentage that we'll see both the offense and the defense improve this year considerably. So it was interesting that I got to sort of that number from a different direction than they had, but sort of got back to the same place. So it's a little bit of a shorter read, but it's, at least for me, but it's an interesting read. If people want to go over there and check it out, I'd appreciate it.
Yep, readreaction.com to check out Will's latest and kind of extend the talk of improvement for the Gators coming up for the 2019 season. So, guys, a little bit of not breaking news, but it did come out on Monday, and we'll dive into it here. Brian Edwards, transferring from University of Florida, junior cornerback. We all remember, arrested back in May on a misdemeanor battery charge for allegedly choking his girlfriend. Suspended from the team indefinitely after the incident, though he remained on campus taking classes. Charges dropped for lack of sufficient evidence back on June 21st. On the field here, Edwards played sparingly in 2 seasons for the Gators, not really expected to be a major contributor this year. 2 seasons, just 7 tackles, 4 pass breakups, fumble recovery there. Not that big of a hit to the Florida secondary. Still was getting reps opposite C.J. Henderson and filling in for a recovering Marco Wilson there in the springtime. It's going to be, it is going to be what it does show. It's going to be important for C.J. McWilliams, Kyer Elam, Jadon Hill, Chester Kimbrough to be able to fill in when and if needed. Going to be interesting to see how this affects them. We just kind of talked about him here on the defense. If this affects how the coaches want to line up Trey Dean at the star, safety, maybe move him back outside if need be. I think that's the kind of last option there for Trey Dean. I think we feel comfortable with Huggins if he had to play star, but it seems like the staff would like to keep Dean at star. And then, it may be, they may get to a point where maybe get the 5 best DBs on the field.
Man, I tell you, that whole Dean and Huggins thing, man, just has me all over the place, man. Part of me wants Dean at the star to have Huggins at the safety spots, and that's what he played last year. But I mean, I kind of think they're interchangeable. I'm just gonna trust the coaching staff on that one. But man, I'm really interested to see how we do that, especially with the suspect safety play we had last year. And as far as the Brian Edwards situation, I mean, like you said, as far as on the field, it's not a huge blow. It can't hurt to have a 3rd-year corner as far as depth goes. But as far as on the field, like really playing time type stuff, I think we'll be all right.
I think the Edwards thing really probably affects things on special teams, right? So who has to step into that role? Because you need those guys who aren't necessarily on the field continuously as starters, but who fill the depth on the backside in terms of special teams. And the defense is starting to get a little bit thin back there. I mean, early in the year, right after National Signing Day, I said, hey, they got 7 blue chip corners they've signed over the last 4 years and 2 safeties. But one of those guys was Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. He's gone. You got Chris Steele, who's also gone. Amari Burney, they've moved to linebackers. So really, those numbers in the defensive backfield are starting to dwindle a little bit. You get a couple of injuries, and all of a sudden you go, it'd be really nice to have that guy who's got 3 years of experience to step in, if you got somebody who's young out there who's struggling. So I think they'll probably be all right. That is the one area where Florida can experience some attrition. Like I said, they had 7 blue chip corners and 2 blue chip safeties over the last 4 years who've signed in. So 9 blue chip guys in the defensive backfield. I think so even with some losses, even with some attrition, you say, hey, we'll be all right. But Florida is not going to fill out their 85 scholarships with 4-star guys. So, you don't want to lose guys who've been in the system for a long time, but hey, best of luck to Edwards. Certainly you hope he catches on somewhere. You hope that the allegations against him aren't true, but I'm certainly sure that colored the way things were and sort of probably also led to him being passed on the depth chart by some people in the spring practice.
Yeah, it was kind of a point here too with that. This might just be, there's the thought out there with all the transfers that's going on, from the University of Florida. This may have just been a point where Edwards, it was just time for a clean start. With everything that went on off the field through spring practice, he wasn't getting the reps there. So maybe just a clean start for him when it's all said and done. And Will, you brought up Burney too at linebacker. His movement there may just be a point where he does stay at that linebacker position this year unless things get really dire, but maybe next year he maybe shuffles back to the secondary just because of we got Marco and Marco CJ leaving. He's not going to play outside cornerback, but it still may affect where you put your other secondary guys.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think one of the things that Grantham and Mullen have preached since they came to Florida is versatility, having guys who can move in and out. So if Burney is able to show that he can excel in coverage, really, I mean, I remember a few years ago when we had Marcel Harris, having him come down into the box, they were able to use the fact that he could tackle like a linebacker, but still could run with tight ends and with slot receivers to really use him in a versatile way. And I think you can see the same thing with a guy like Burney, right? That if he's just as good a cover guy as he was when he was a few pounds lighter, but he can really lay the wood. I mean, you can use him in ways. It means he can be a 3-down guy, right? So he doesn't have to come off the field when they go into a passing situation or go onto the field when basically it allows you to use him every time you need, all game long, all 3 downs. You don't have to switch people in and out. And particularly in the Tennessee game a couple years ago, you saw that a lot with Jeremiah Moon having to run him in and out at linebacker and some other guys. And Tennessee really took advantage of it with some of the screens to the running back and getting him out in open space and really killed Florida in that game. So, I think so a little bit with Burney, but I think really versatility is what they're looking for. You see that with Huggins a little bit. You can see that with Dean a little bit. And, I think we'll probably see that with Elam and Kimbrough a little bit as well.
It may just come to a point where Burney just doesn't really have a set position. They can move him front, they can move him mid-level or back level there and get the use out of him there. So let's get back to some big news here. Richie Leonard commits to the Gators. He's the 3rd decommit from Kentucky that has later committed to the Gators. So 3 stars, 3rd offensive line commit for the 2020 class. And when he committed last Friday, out of Cocoa, Florida, 6'2", 320 pounds, the 728th ranked player, 45th ranked offensive guard in the state of Florida's 102nd ranked player. Mentioned his high school coach played for offensive line coach John Hevesy, so there's a connection there. So Gators now with the number 9 class on the 24/7 Sports composite, 4th in the SEC, and an average of 89.71, which comes out to be a 4-star in the 307 ranked player range there. So the 3rd offensive lineman commits to the Gators, Stephon.
Oh, man, I like what we're doing in the trenches, man, picking up some nice size. I know these guys aren't rated all that highly, but John Hevesy has a tendency to want to pick up bigger guys and then just let him develop on his own. I think as long as we get these guys, these big massive guys in to our strength and conditioning program, let Nick Savage get his hands on them, and then let Hevesy coach them on the field, I think we'll be just fine. It would be nice to get some blue chip guys, some 4-star, 5-star guys, some Leatherwood types, but I trust Hevesy. He's got a very good track record of doing this, so he's picking up massive bodies. They're not 3-star little guys, you know what I mean? They're not Miami's offensive line. So, well, I trust Hevesy. Let's do it.
I wrote something a couple years ago about looking at top 10 defenses and top 10 offenses, and the skill guys on offense did not need to be 5-star guys. The skill guys on defense needed to be those high-level guys. So if you look at Florida's 2020 recruiting class, 4 of their top 5 guys are defensive guys. They got 2 defensive tackles, an outside linebacker, and a defensive end, and then they got Leonard Manuel, a wide receiver. So, I think that one of the things that Hevesy's proven is that he can get a lot out of offensive lines. I mean, talked about that a couple of weeks ago, Dave, with Mississippi State and the success they had on the offensive line. I think that's true. I mean, you look at top offenses in college football. I mean, UCF is always up there, and they don't have a bunch of 5-star offensive linemen. And granted, they don't play an SEC schedule, but even teams like Alabama didn't necessarily have lights out offenses and lights out offensive lines when they were building the program. Now 10 years in, Saban's got offensive lines that are just chock full of 5-star guys. But I think you can get away with it on offense much more than you can on defense. So that's the space where I'd really pay attention is, okay, who are we bringing on the defensive line? Who are we bringing in at linebacker? Those are really the guys that if you're bringing in blue chip, top tier talent, those are the guys you want. And then obviously on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, you don't want to turn down a Percy Harvin if you've got him, but those guys are pretty rare. But the guy who can take the ball to the house becomes really important. But I think sort of stocking up on guys in the 300 range is okay, as long as you get a bunch of them, because then you only need, if you get 3, 4, 5 of them to hit, you've got a pretty effective offense.
Yeah, and there we go. One you get a commitment from offensive guard Richie Leonard last Friday, and then we get the news. Of course, De'Ave Hammond, 2019 offensive guard prospect, will not make it on campus for the Gators. Won't qualify academically for the Gators. He was a 4-star offensive guard there for the 2019 class, of course. And leaves the 2019 class with 4 players that have already left the class. Jalen Jones and Chris Steele already transferring out. And honestly, those are some pretty rare, odd instances in losing those 2 as early enrollees and the situations they found themselves in. Then the one black, and now De'Ave Hammond not qualifying academically. Hammond was the highest rated offensive lineman for the Gators 2019 class. That was pretty deep at the position, but also a group where we're still waiting on Wardrobe Wilson to attend Florida after being denied his visa coming from the Bahamas to Florida. And also, as of this Monday evening, July 8th here, still waiting on wide receivers R.J. Henderson and Deontay Marks. Things look good for Henderson. If we want to go by a tweet that he put out today, we'll kind of see where that goes. Deontay Marks, for Henderson and Marks, keep hearing that these guys, should be good to go by August. By the time fall camp comes around, that they'll be in there. But guys, the deflections happens, nothing new. But it is odd, that it's happening this early before these guys even see the field. Hopefully, it stays hold here. That we don't get any more counting those 2 guys I just mentioned. Not really going to affect the 2019 season much at all. But eventually, these players could have been needed. They could eventually, DeJuan Black. Still, his goal is to get back to Florida after attending JUCO here, but you never know after going the JUCO route and the weird way, Florida, not a lot of success in trying to get JUCO guys in to Florida here. So, while not needed for 2019, still will have liked to see them on campus, in class, working out with Nick Savage, getting adjusted to a college program like Florida, getting the playbook, get developed without having to rush players, into games before they're ready and be ready when their name is called. So this could affect depth down the road, and the Gators will get 2 counters back for Black and Hammond not qualifying. I kind of refuse to panic about it at this point in time. There's ways to make it up, and hopefully time to make it up. Transfer portal being one way does put an importance on the rest of the class, the rest of the 2019 class. They have to hit on the field, and also kind of, to me, really have to hit on this 2020 class. Looking down the road, there's going to need to be many young contributors in 2020, 2021. After what I would expect to be a large class leaving after this coming season. And our good friend Thomas Goldcamp kind of put it best on Twitter today. He has the Gators at 78 scholarships for this fall, and that's counting Noah Banks. We don't know his status right now. And of course, not a huge issue for 2019, but quote, UF is going to be young in 2020 and 2021.
I think that's probably the only thing that has me concerned. Not a whole lot about this year. Just like you said, 2020, 2021 will be a really, really young team. 2020, the way that Felipe talks, I mean, he'll be gone. So we'll have Emory, and that's okay. You know what I mean? I don't have a problem with that. I would probably feel a little more comfortable with a fifth-year senior at quarterback in that position as opposed to a first-year starting, redshirt sophomore. But if that's the cards that we're dealt, again, back to what I said about the DBs and with the safety situation with Trey Dean and John Huggins, I just trust the coaching staff. Again, we can address it, transfer portal. We can coach guys up. We'll be young in 2020 and 2021, but I still don't think it's at a point we should be panicking.
Yeah, I think the issue isn't necessarily just the attrition we've already seen this year, though it's concerning when you've got 4 or 5 guys who aren't actually who aren't going to suit up for the team who had signed out of that 25-man class. But there's also attrition from last year, and some of that is health related, some of that is discipline related, some of it's transfer related. But you got Randy Russell, Malik Langham, and Justin Watkins who aren't with the team. And if you take those 7 guys, their average national ranking was 235. Their average 24/7 ranking was 92.3. So basically, we're talking Alabama level recruiting here in terms of those 7 guys. I mean, 42nd ranked was Chris Steele. Watkins was 89th. One Black 151, Hammond 242, Jalen Jones 306, Malik Langham 315, and Randy Russell 501. So, I mean, if you put those guys on the 2020 recruiting class, we'd say that's a hell of a finish.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
it's something that is concerning. The other thing I think, and you guys have alluded to it. So this year, if you look at Lindy's, they've projected 5 of Florida starters are going to come from the 2015 signing class. 8 are going to come from 2016, 7 are going to come from 2017, 2 are going to come from 2018, and none are going to come from 2019. So it says that the last couple of signing classes, we aren't necessarily getting a lot of guys who are coming in and making an instant impact, but it also says, I went back and looked, 91%, 19 of the guys who Lindy's projects as starters on Florida's offense and defense this year are going to be draft eligible after this season. So if Florida goes 11-1 or 12-1 or something like that, you can expect a pretty large exodus. And
just off the top of the head here, Franks, you got the 5 receivers: Jefferson, Grimes, Cleveland, Hammond, Swain. You're fine on offensive line. Maybe even Tony if he hasn't. Yeah, if he has a crazy year, and then the 2 corners: Wilson, Henderson, David Reese, Zuniga, Grenard. I mean, I'm telling you, I mean, we're talking about being young in 2020. That's why, because those guys are just quickly named off the top of my head who may not be on the team next year.
Well, and we talk all the time about recruiting being about probability, right? That it's not that the 3-star can't make it. It's that on a percentage basis, less 3-stars make it than 4 stars, less 4 stars make it than 5 stars. And so if you all of a sudden go from a 25-man class to a 20-man class, well, now you got to hit at a higher percentage in order to compete. And, again, you look at Florida's last 3 classes. They had 23 guys signed in 2017. They had 17 guys signed if you take the 3 guys out who have already left the program. And then you had 21 guys signed this year if you take away the 4. So you're looking at an average of 20.3 signees per year. With a national rank, which would be around 14 and an SEC rank of 6. They still have a 24/7 sports average of 90.2, so they're still very, very good players, but there just aren't a whole lot of them, right? I mean, they're basically down 5 per year over the last 3 years because of the transition occurring under McElwain, and then Mullen coming in his first year, and now the second year class having some issues. So, just from a numbers perspective and a bodies perspective, it becomes concerning. I mean, if you look at Georgia, 2017, they had 25 signees, 24 in 2018, 24 in 2019. So Georgia's going to have to replace a lot after this year too, because they're sort of leveraged in that 2016 and 2017 class as well. But they already have 3 guys who are projected to start from the 2018 class and 2 guys who are projected to start from the 2019 class this year. So next year, when you say how many returning starters do you have, they're going to be in that 11 or 12 range, as opposed to Florida, where, I mean, again, if Florida has a really good year this year, it could be that Florida's bringing back, 6 returning starters or something because of all the guys who've had to leave.
Scary proposition. I mean, I have done it in my head a little bit, just listen to those names that I just named. But I mean, yeah, but this may, if you're going to make a deep run, I kind of hate to go back and give McElwain a whole lot of credit, but this team is built. This year's team is built on a lot of his guys, and if Florida makes a deep run, it's going to be because of the class McElwain brought in and the classes that he brought in that have stayed. Of course, transfers, Grimes and Jefferson. We give Mullen credit there, and also developing these guys. But maybe we'll have to give McElwain a little bit more credit if this team goes on a deep run.
I refuse.
We're just gonna hope that Dan Mullen will develop Dan Mullen guys, and we don't have to give Mac any credit. We'll give Mullen all the credit.
We'll keep it going. A couple more things before we wrap up here quickly. I put it out there, guys. I'm not a big numbers guy. I don't really care what numbers guys wear, but I know Gator Nation does care about it. Henderson, CJ Henderson, Kadarius Toney, both those guys get the number one, the coveted number one, and to me, it speaks a whole lot of trust in these two guys, and CJ Henderson proves it on the field, proves it that he's one of the nation's best cornerbacks. Florida's top draft prospect. Wearing the number one, no surprise there. A little bit of a surprise of Kadarius Toney getting it, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. And I think if Mullen decides to give him this number one jersey, I think he's shown enough to get it there. It does show to me that maybe he has done a lot in the winter conditioning and spring practice, and now the workouts that they're going through now, that Mullen trusts him because Mullen he's been asked about this number one jersey, and the players asking for it, and this guy, he says it's got to be ballers, it's guys who can produce on the field, but also I think guys that he trusts in giving that number to there. So Henderson, Toney get the number ones, and that was probably the biggest takeaway on Twitter, even bigger than the Brian Edwards story.
Yeah, same here. Not a big jersey numbers guy myself. I guess I'm as excited as you guys. Doesn't really matter. As long as they go out there and play good on the field, perform well, help us get wins, that's cool. You can wear the letter F. It doesn't matter to me. I'm cool with it as long as we get some wins.
And you guys are so lame. I'm so excited about Cody wearing the one, man. You knew I was going to be excited.
Well, my bad. I forgot Kadarius Toney was your guy. So
you knew I was going to be excited about this. You look, and one of the questions that I think a lot of people asked you last year is, why is Toney not on the field? Because every time he touched the ball, it was an automatic 12 yards, and sometimes it was 30. And you're just like, every time he's on the field, the defense has to account for him. Why is he not out there as a decoy? Use the guy as a decoy. And I think what we found is later on in the year, especially I think I highlighted a couple of times in the South Carolina game, where Toney was integral in the blocking game, and it freed him up for some of those reverses that they were able to run. One in particular against South Carolina that sort of put him down in the red zone that allowed Franks to run in that game-winning touchdown. And so I think the trust is probably more on the blocking side. That's why I'm excited about the number one, because I think it means that Mullen thinks he's going to be on the field a lot. He's going to leave him out there to block. And if he's out there as a decoy, watch out, because if he's out there 70-80% of the plays, he's going to have a huge year.
I mean, the thing is, maybe he's becoming a true receiver. He's not just a utility guy, a guy you get it in his hands. Maybe he is. We saw toward the end of last year where maybe he can run a slant like the way he's supposed to, beat the DB off of coverage and get it. It's more of becoming a true wide receiver, and maybe that's where maybe this number one kind of signifies that he's putting in the work, he's putting in determination, coming along and progressing as being a true wide receiver instead of just the playmaker utility guy.
That part is definitely exciting. When I saw that Toney got the number one, I was like, okay, he's going to be utilized a lot more this year. And that part did get me excited. As far as the number itself, I don't really care. But what it indicates, I'm here for it.
There we go. That's exactly the way I look at it, too. So before we wrap up, guys, a little bit of a somber note. Mr. Two Bits, George Edmondson, of course, passes away at 97. Known as the Florida Gators, known to us fans as Mr. Two Bits, passed away July 2nd last week. And the University of Florida has put out Celebration of Life will be held in Tampa in August. And All friends of the Gators are invited to attend. Details will be announced at a later date. Survived by his wife, Jane, as well as 3 children, 3 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren. It all started in 1949 at Florida Field when Edmondson looked at the crowd around him. They're playing the Citadel, and fans were booing the Gators. The fans booing their own team out there, and George would not stand for it, jumped up, got the fans cheering, and so began the legend of Mr. Two Bits. For 60 years, Gator fans from all across the world became eternally grateful for the man who started every Gator home football game with the phrase 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits a dollar, all for the Gators, stand up and holler. We all remember him in his yellow shirt, walking around the stadium in the orange and blue tie. You'd see him, before he retired, kind of toward the later years, he slowed down, but you would see him walk around the stadium. He'd be in different parts of the stadium around the game, doing the cheer. It's it is a somber, I do miss it before every game. Now that he's the one out there, that Florida will bring in some celebrities, some former athletes, some current athletes to kind of lead the way in doing the 2 bits cheer. But, it is, what I said, it is a generic cheer, but it is more the tradition behind it. And, college football is built on tradition, and one that Edmondson started will always live in Gator lore.
Yeah, I don't know. I never got to see Mr. Two Bits in person. I've been more just used to seeing the celebrities do it and whatnot. But anybody that has anything to do with just building the great Gator tradition, I'm here for it, man. And so if we lost him, he's a part of the family, man. And he's a part of our family. So a big loss all the way around on the Gator Nation.
No, it was a pretty cool story. I never really realized what the backstory was about how that started. And so to hear about people booing the Florida program and him standing up, it made me think like we needed Mr. Two Bits on Twitter to to calm things down a little bit. But, it's funny. I took my daughter to a Florida State game about 3 years ago. And, one of the things she was really attracted to was that, and obviously it wasn't him doing the cheer, but the actual cheer itself was one of the things she really enjoyed about the game. And I think that's kind of also what it indicates is the youthful enthusiasm, we try to bring analysis and sometimes it can come off as cynical, I'm sure, but at our hearts, we're all Gator fans, and it all started when we were kids. And again, it's just it's part of us, right? It's part of our life, and that's really one of the cool things. And I think it's a really it struck me that it was a really cool thing that all the Gator fans were sort of came together and were kind for a day when the announcement came out. And I think that's really the legacy of Mr. Two Bits, and a significant one.
Absolutely. So he will be missed. He's been missed, ever since he retired. But I'm sure we all can't wait when the Gators' first home game of the season. It's going to be a kind of a somber moment, but a happy moment at the same time when we're all doing 2 bits there in our first home game of the season there. So, all right, guys. Anything else, Stefan? I can't thank you enough, man, for joining us here on the first time. We'll definitely get you back on. And all the research and numbers you brought to the table. That's what Gators Breakdown is known for, and you fit right in.
All right, thank you guys, man. I'm a longtime fan. I just love you guys' work. Thank you guys for the opportunity. And kind of to that same note that Will said, man, like I know that when we bring up the numbers, especially on an episode like today when we're talking about areas that the Gators can improve, it can come across as cynical. But at the end of the day, we are actually Gator fans. I know some people find that hard to believe sometimes, but we are Gator fans, man. We did go from 4 wins in 2017 to 10 wins in 2018 and a Peach Bowl win, a New Year's Six Bowl win. For me, it's not so much a question of can we do better next year? And I think it's the same thing for you guys. It's a matter of how and what needs to change and what we need to improve on. That was the point of this episode. It wasn't that we don't think that we can, or we were just pointing out only flaws and that, we're a terrible team, we're going to take a step back. But when you win 10 games, and you get a Peach Bowl win, a New Year's Six win, it does put you in a position where you can be a little more picky and you can be a little more detailed and start finding little things that we need to work on. I really hate to use this phrase because Mac ran this into the ground. I don't want to bring up any McElwain stuff, but attention to detail. Like we just really can focus in on that. And just since we already got a lot of the big things down, the work ethics things like that Mullen brought to the table and Savage brought to the table when they came to Gainesville, At this point, it's just little things. It's finishing when you get inside the 10-yard line. It's getting that push. It's when when Freddie Swain or whoever's back there returning punts. If we can get an extra 5 yards, we'll field it properly. And if we don't get blocking in the back penalties that set us back and start us behind on drive, just little things to where we can just keep progressing and getting better and getting to that level that all of Gator Nation wants us to be at. That's what we're here about, guys. So go Gators, man.
Well said. Well said. Will, what you got coming up, reading reaction?
Yeah, so I'll be writing a little bit about some of the numbers I brought up about Florida starters and how that compares to Georgia and what that looks like coming forward. Some of the guys we talked about who are going to be graduating, and then also I mentioned some of the film stuff I've been doing with Missouri and Mississippi State, and sort of the difference between those things and what we can look for Grantham's defense. So those will probably be some things come up in the next couple of weeks, and then something always pops up with this team. There's never dull moments, so something else will come up, and I'm sure we'll write about that too.
I keep saying it. When I picked that catchphrase, good Lord, I didn't know it was going to be so true.
Never a dull moment in a good way, though, from here on out.
Yeah, there we go. From here on out, we've got about 18 more days till fall camp starts. So let's keep it there. Like I said,
put away the frying pans.
Yeah, frying pan. Go away. All right. SEC Media Days, like I said, coverage next Monday. I don't know if I'll do anything live or not. It'll be tough, kind of see what we get from Dan Mullen and the players. Have not announced the players yet. That's going to be heading to SEC Media Days. But quickly, I guess I'll guess Franks, P. Ryan, and Zuniga. That's my 3. So I think we'll hear from those 3 guys. Probably they're maybe their last seasons at Florida, especially certain for Zuniga and P. Ryan. But we'll see with Felipe Franks. So that's kind of the 3 I see. Should be announced sometime this week. There. Any guesses for you guys who the 3 will be?
That sounds good to me. Maybe Franks, P. Ryan, and Henderson, maybe, just to throw something different out there, a different combination, but
CJ's just not really a talker, so I wasn't really sure.
Right, yeah. Good point.
I might throw in David Reese or Tyree Cleveland. Those are some guys who are late in their careers who have really given their heart and soul to the program, and might be somebody that Mullen decides to bring along.
Only reason I won't say Reese, but I know it's been done before, is he went last year. So, but I mean, there have been players who's been there twice. So we'll see. We'll see there. So, yep, that's what we got cooking for Gators Breakdown. Next Monday will be a show from SEC Media Days. So for Stefan, you can find him on Twitter at RedTopDreadTop, and you can find Will on Twitter at WillMilesSEC and his site readandreaction.com. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.